During the Gilded Age, Hetty Green was the richest and supposedly cheapest woman in America. It's said that when her son broke his leg, instead of taking him to the hospital, she tried to fix it herself. When that failed, she pretended to be poor and tried to enter the free clinic. It was only after his leg got infected that she relented and paid for his leg to be amputated. Not so fun fact part 1. Joanna of Castile was madly in love with her husband Philip. When she found out he was seeing another woman, she stabbed the mistress in the face with scissors. Joanna was a mess when Philip died. She didn't want to part ways, so she ordered for his casket to be dug up and laid next to his rotting corpse. After undergoing breast augmentation, Andrea Jones went to the DMV to change her sex to read female. When her request was denied, she went outside and took off her shirt. She was arrested despite the fact that it's legal in Tennessee for men to be shirtless outside, and according to her license and subsequent police report, she was a male. Not so fun fact part 2. When Charles Dickens grew tired of his marriage, he attempted to have his wife committed to a mental asylum to get rid of her, and started pursuing a relationship with young actress Ellen Ternan. This is Jo Cameron. She was born with a rare genetic mutation that made her unable to feel pain. Any wound she gets heals quickly, and she only notices burns when she smells her burning flesh. She even said the process of giving birth felt like a tickle. Her situation caught the attention of doctors after she claimed she felt nothing when the bones in her hip and hand were completely mangled and deformed. In addition to feeling no pain, negative emotions like anger, stress, anxiety, and fear have never been felt by Jo. You most likely know about the assassination of Lincoln, but you probably don't know about the sad story of Henry Rathbone, the man who almost caught Booth. Henry and his fiancée Clara were invited by Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln to accompany them to the theater. After Booth fired the shot, Henry immediately tackled him to the ground, but he was able to get free by stabbing Henry deep in the arm. The guilt Henry felt for letting Booth escape never went away, and his mental and physical health took a steep decline, having a variety of health issues and growing more paranoid and angrier as time went on. 18 years after the event, Henry attempted to shoot his children. Clara, now his wife, tried to protect them and was fatally shot and stabbed by Henry. Henry then stabbed himself in the chest but survived. Instead of being sent to prison, he was declared insane and spent the rest of his life in a mental institution.
Did you know that the author, W.T. Stead, predicted the Titanic sinking in his 1886 story, The Sinking of a Modern Liner, and that he died during the real-life event? The story he wrote was eerily similar to the actual Titanic tragedy. It included a big ocean liner having a collision and sinking in the Atlantic, killing the majority of the passengers due to a lack of lifeboats. The fictitious ship shared many characteristics with the real Titanic, such as size, speed, luxury, and being described as unsinkable. It's crazy that Stead was unknowingly writing about how he and 1,000 others would die.
In 1929, scientists Ernest Waver and Charles Bray turned a cat into a telephone. They heavily sedated it, cut open its head, and attached one end of a telephone wire to the auditory nerve and the other end to a telephone receiver. When Charles would speak into the cat's ear, Ernest was able to hear through the phone from 50 feet away. The cat survived the experiment. However, Ernest and Charles didn't set it free. Instead, they killed it to see if the experiment would work with a dead cat. It did not. Although the experiment was undeniably cruel, it led to the creation of many auditory devices to help the hearing impaired.
During World War II, a Great Dane named Juliana was awarded 2 Blue Cross medals for her heroic acts. The first medal was for extinguishing a bomb that dropped on her owner's home by peeing on it, and the second medal was for alerting her owner of a fire that had started in his shop. Sadly, Juliana met a cruel end when an unknown person slipped poison through her owner's doormail slot. She consumed the substance and died soon after. In 1562, Queen Elizabeth suffered smallpox and used makeup to cover her scars. She applied a thick layer of Venetian ceruse, a white paste containing lead, which is poisonous to humans. Elizabeth's red lipstick was also poisoning her because it contained mercury, another toxic substance. To make matters worse, she would leave the makeup on for weeks at a time and remove it with a product containing mercury. The constant use of the makeup led to a number of ailments, and after a 45-year reign, Elizabeth died at the age of 69. The exact cause of her death remains unknown, but many suspect blood poisoning brought on by her toxic makeup.
In January 1919, an enormous molasses tank exploded and flooded the north end of Boston. It started at the United States Industrial Alcohol Building. As workers were going about their day, a 58-foot-high tank filled with 2.5 million gallons of crude molasses was quietly testing the limits of the bolts holding the tank together. Suddenly, the bolts broke, and hot molasses shot out, creating a huge wave that drowned and burned nearby workers and surged its way through the street to destroy cars and buildings. 21 people people were killed, and over 150 were injured. It took weeks to clean up the mess, and many locals reported that years later, when the weather was hot, they could still smell the sickly sweetness of molasses. In the late 1800s, a vampire hunt swept Rhode Island. It all started when a bout of tuberculosis, then called consumption, started to take out many of the residents. Since victims tended to look haggard and pale, coughed up white phlegm, and had foamy blood, residents assumed a vampire must have gotten to them. When members of an Exeter, Rhode Island family kept dying of consumption, the other townspeople concluded that someone in the family was feeding on the others. After the mother and her 2 children died, the villagers decided to dig up their bodies, fearing that one of them was the culprit. 19-year-old Mercy Brown had died much more recently than the rest of her family, so when they dug her up, her corpse was in much better condition. Her heart even had some decaying blood in it, which was enough evidence of vampirism. To stop her from striking again, they burned her heart and liver and mixed the ashes with water. They then gave the mixture to another sick resident as a cure. It obviously did not work. This man survived 2 atomic bombs. In 1945, nuclear bombs were dropped over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Over 90,000 people were killed in the attacks. However, Tsutomu Yamaguchi had been present in each city on the days of the bombings and had survived. He visited Hiroshima on August 6th as part of a business trip and was walking when he heard the sound of a plane and noticed 2 parachutes falling from the sky. As he was looking up, there was a sudden flash and he was blown over. By August 9th, he had returned home to Nagasaki, only to relive the experience all over again. Despite receiving 2 lethal doses of radiation, Yamaguchi lived to be 93.
After winning $1.3 million in the lottery, Denise Rossi immediately filed for divorce from her husband of 25 years. 2 years later, he found out she won and took her to court. Because she purposely didn't disclose her win, it was determined that she acted out of fraud and malice. The judge ruled in her ex-husband's favor by awarding all of Denise's lottery winnings to him. Did you know that feeding prisoners lobster was once considered cruel and unusual punishment? In the 1800s, lobster was plentiful and cheap. It had the nickname cockroaches of the sea and was thought to be unsuitable for human consumption. So of course, prisoners and servants were constantly served lobster. Eventually, lawmakers in New England forbade serving prisoners lobster more than once a week. The reputation of lobster has drastically changed, and I'm sure prisoners today would welcome being served lobster with open arms. Diane de Poitiers was a French noblewoman and the mistress of King Henry II. When she wasn't hooking up with the king, she was obsessing over how to preserve her youth. She started drinking a daily potion of gold chloride mixed with diethyl ether. However, gold is a heavy metal that can accumulate in the body and damage the organs. So instead of making her youthful, it made her ill. It wasn't long until she passed away due to consuming too much gold. In 1386, France, a pig was accused of attacking a 3-month-old child who was lying in his crib. The child ended up dying from its injuries, and the pig was arrested and sentenced to death by hanging. The pig was also dressed in human clothes and had its limbs cut off as a form of retribution.